Kamala Harris is on target to win by just under a double-digit margin. It's also probably blue. And last, on this map, Virginia is the most likely state. Of course, from 2020, Kamala Harris will likely prevail by roughly half of Biden's 10-point margin. She will not be able to get anywhere over 7, most likely not over 6 either. Still, a 5-point margin of victory is reasonable, given that even Hillary Clinton prevailed by more than 5% in 2016. Her performance all around was, of course, rather poor. Virginia, meantime, has been moving to the right. Harris is going to perform far worse than the current president for primarily this reason. Still, it's going to be probably for now. We shall be somewhat giving to the Democrats, and thus we have just the 7 battleground states left. This hardly surprises me at all. These are the 7 races we have been focusing mostly on over the whole year. And with them not yet filled in, Kamala Harris is that 226 electoral vote surpass at 219. Basically, the election is still a tie until we arrive to these battlefields. This group of 7 truly is just that. Though they account for only 93 of the electoral colleges, 538 votes, they truly hold all the power. The outcomes in every other state are essentially preordained. Now, for Minnesota, Virginia, or New Hampshire, for example, there were areas where Trump seemed to shine. Realistically, though, those are always far shots. Now it was plausible if Trump kept performing remarkably in those states. But now, with 1 day left to go, I am here to tell you that simply isn't going to happen. Anyone claiming Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, or New Mexico is actually competitive is just lying to your face. Thus, 2 of the 7 states will be labeled as lead based on this. The other 5 will be tilting. Lean states will thus be decided by a 1 to 5 point margin. Obviously, tilt states fall short of 1. We'll start south in the Sun Belt. We first will begin with the 2 lean states. And just to let you know here, both of them will be attending Donald Trump. I start in Arizona, where Donald Trump is expected to prevail by 1 to 3 points. The proximity of these races makes anything feasible. However, given that Trump won Arizona by almost 4 points in 2016 and lost by 0.3 to Joe Biden in 2020, it most certainly seems that he will be winning in that state. The polls show Trump leading by 2.6% today. Based just on the graph here, his lead has only been rising as the election approaches. He is doing really nicely. He is quite improbable going to lose Arizona. For the former president, this is absolutely a winning state. Should he lose Arizona, the contest ends. As of right now, though, he most certainly will flip Arizona back. It will be the first lean red state mapped. And Georgia, on the other side of the Sun Belt, will naturally be the other lean state. Really, this race resembles the Arizona election rather closely. Trump lost Georgia barely as well, with 0.24% separating Biden from the former president. Now, both of these states were historic turns for Joe Biden in 2020. From 1996, no Democrat had won Arizona all around. Georgia, you have to go back to 1992. Now, given how historic these wins were for Democrats, Kamala Harris, who is performing far worse than Joe Biden, simply isn't in a position to achieve the success Biden had here 4 years ago. Like they have been voting for the past 30 years, both of these states are quite likely to revert into the Republican column. Georgia thus gives Trump 2.3% in the polling average favoritism. There is also a fresh New York Times poll showing Harris up by 1. Clearly, that is going to be erroneous. The New York Times consistently exaggerates Democratic count. After Harris peaked following the Democratic conference, Trump has been ahead essentially since early September. But starting in the middle of last month, Trump's lead has been widening. He is in a really good position here. Georgia's basic nature is still conservative, and on this map it will be the other lean Republican state. And so Arizona and Georgia are must victories, simply to chart Trump's possible routes to triumph here. Should Trump fail to secure these 2 states, it is quite improbable he will be able to win any of the other toss-ups that will ultimately yield 270 electoral votes. The good news is, though, that even if he loses, he is rather likely to win Georgia and Arizona. Thus, at the very least, this essentially represents his floor. Less than 1%, or perhaps slightly over 1%, will most likely determine all 5 of the surviving states. But since they are truly that competitive, I will be grouping them all under the tilt categories for either Democrats or Republicans. Now for Trump, North Carolina and Pennsylvania would be his fastest road to triumph. Although the Pennsylvania road would be more likely right now, it could also pass through North Carolina and Wisconsin. Nevada only has 6 electoral votes, thus winning Nevada doesn't really matter to Trump. North Carolina absolutely does. Actually, Trump is doing rather nicely in the Tar Heel state. His polling average leads by 1.5%. He is rather obviously the favorite. He brought North Carolina home in 2016 and 2020. From the 7 swing states he carried in both of the past 2 elections, this is the only one. He lost Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania in 2020, but North Carolina he managed to hang on to, and he's going to win it once more. I do have tilt Republican here. Though he has led the polling average the whole election cycle, the margin will be a somewhat smaller one. Mark Robinson, the Republican nominee for governor, is the reason North Carolina appeals to me as more competitive. He has conducted a campaign with disaster. He has participated in so many scandals. He will lose to Josh Stein almost by a double-digit margin. Robinson is not going to be able to pull Trump down in the presidential contest, but he is definitely not doing the former president any favors. Thus, I do have the Tar Heel state voting somewhat to the left of both Arizona and Georgia. With Trump at 262 electoral votes, he is thus only 8 away from the presidency. He will want any one of the 3 upper Midwestern states. With its 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania is also quite likely to be the keystone state that helps him to calm his frenzy. There is rather close an election there. Trump sets the pace at 0.3%. Though Republicans are looking good, especially with early voting, it is absolutely going to go right to the wire. Following the early 2020 voting period, they lag by almost 1 million. Democrats lead nowadays by less than 500,000. Their target was a buffer of 500,000 or perhaps 600,000. Their reach fell short of that. And in a state they carried by just 80,000 votes 4 years ago, that little difference will be rather significant. The first attempted failed murder on Trump also happened in Pennsylvania. He will find some minor benefit from that. And once more, in a race as near as this one, every tiny bit counts. Pennsylvania will thus be the second tilt state on the map. By a quite small margin, I have it in Trump's favor. Although this election is close, we really don't need Arizona given wins in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Nonetheless, Donald Trump does cross the finish line with these 4 triumphs. He will still do a little bit more, though. With his 1% polling average advantage, Trump is also going to win Nevada. Now, since Nevada hasn't gone red since the 2004 election, victory here will be challenging for the former president. A win here would thus be rather significant. Although the 2 candidates are running closely according to the polls, Republicans are gaining ground in the Silver State. By defeating the current Democrat, Republicans gained the governorship of Nevada in 2022. Trump will thus also make notable advances here. With the former president ranking less than half a percentage point, it will be tilt Republican. Lastly, in Wisconsin and Michigan, these are essentially toss-ups. Usually I would classify them as toss-up and not fill them in at all. Clearly, though, I would assume you people would want me to respond for every one of these states. And in Wisconsin and Michigan, the polls essentially match Harris up by 0.3 in Wisconsin by 0.6 in Michigan. Now, the early voting numbers are the main reason I'm giving Kamala Harris a narrow lead rather than the polling. Comparatively to Pennsylvania and Nevada, the vice president is in a somewhat better posture. We all know, of course, that Wisconsin and Michigan will vote left of those 2 states. Given Pennsylvania and Nevada's proximity, I also see the most reasonable result as being the one whereby Kamala Harris barely edges Trump out in both Wisconsin and Michigan. If Trump were able to carry 2 states as well, though, I would most certainly not be surprised. This is it then. This is my projection for the 2024 elections. Final. Donald Trump gains 287 electoral votes, while Kamala Harris scores 251. Although it will be a close contest, Trump will be re-elected to be the 47th president, thus he will declare a clear victory. I really appreciate you folks watching. Verify your enjoyment of this video. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel and write down below who you believe will be the election winner.